it's been a while since I've made an update, and a lot of stuff has happened. I'll start off, I got some health news. Last video I mentioned that I was diagnosed with a condition called Marfan syndrome. And essentially what it does is it weakens your connective tissues. The symptoms that I've had from that so far are things like herniated discs, torn spinal membrane, fairly minor things, so to speak. But because of the diagnosis, I had to go get my heart valves measured, because one of the things that can happen is your valves can enlarge and weaken and cause risk of aneurysm, I believe. I got the results back from that, and it turns out that my heart valves are enlarging and starting to fail. So because I haven't had them measured before this, we don't kind of have a baseline as to how fast the rate of failure is. But now, since we do have a baseline, we can keep an eye on it, and if they start to get too big or show signs of tearing or anything like that, then that means they can go in and replace the valves. So not great, but also just kind of gives me more motivation to do what I want to do and achieve my dreams. Now, the lack of update isn't for lack of progress. Actually, I've got a ton of things done. Got some parts that I needed, got some other parts, some goodies. So I'll just kind of start by showing you what I've got finished. My Mega Squirt ECU picked up. I did have to go through there with a soldering iron and change some resistors and jumpers around, put new LEDs in. The Mega Squirt ECUs are dependent on what motor they will be used on. So different motors require different configurations of the actual board. So things like optical versus VR or Hall sensors, RPM triggering wheel styles, falling edge, leading edge, things like that. You can see here that I've got both of the harness leads finished. That looks like a mess, but I assure you it's all where it needs to be. I scored this super sweet tilt-in floor mount pedal box. I'm really excited about this. I will have to get different master cylinders. This is my Hydro master cylinder, just in there for reference. I also need to make a throttle pedal for it, which should be fairly easy considering the design of the pedals already on there. I've been really grinding away trying to get a lot of the fabrication done on the cage and the rear end, rear mount rad, that sort of thing, so I'll show you that now as well. Okay, so I've got the fuel cell retainer finished. It provided a good place to mount some things like the battery. I picked up a used Aeromotive A1000 fuel pump. These things are absolutely beastly. I will have to have a a Bosch 044 to be used as a lift pump. The original design of the retainer hoop that I made was pretty weak, and there was a lot of flex in it, so I added these bars that go up to the strut towers. I had Warren from BC Works modify my surge tank to fit dash 10 and dash 8 fittings rather than dash 8 and dash 6. I spent the money and got Russell AN fittings. The rear mount radiator, I need to have some tabs tagged on here. I'll probably get Warren again from BC Works to do that before I can create mounts from it. I'll probably take something off of these bars and mount it to the side like that. The firewall is roughly put into place. I'll have to put little flanges off to the side to actually mount this to. This is just press fit currently. I got a water meth kit, so I'll be injecting water into my intake. sorry, just pre-throttle body. I'll put the nozzle in the intercooler charge piping. I need to get an intake air temp sensor, which I'll probably thread and put in here. I picked up some fuel rails. When I was knocking up the coil packs, I realized that there's no way that I can actually have the plug wires go past these headers because they'll just melt. So I'm relocating my coil packs down there to the frame rails. I figured that was kind of a cool spot for them, nice and out of the way, and it keeps the wires as far away from the headers as possible. My buddy Ian installed my oil filter relocate. After I got the pedal box, I realized that I don't need any master cylinders right here anymore, and coincidentally, I don't know if you can see it, but there's sort of a little rounded cutout on the firewall that actually just fits the oil filter absolutely perfectly. I modified the oil pickup tube as needed to be modified. So the oil pan is on and good to go, hopefully. I also put these Dash 8 return bulkhead fittings for the turbos, but I think I'm going to upgrade those to a Dash 10. On the journal bearing style turbos, the oil drain is just gravity feed, so you want it to be the least amount of restriction as possible. I was cleaning up a little bit of the old crappy metal that was left over from when I tubed the front, and I actually noticed that my front cross member here, all the spot welds had broken off and it was just kind of hanging around there. So because it's forward of the forwardmost suspension mounting points, you are allowed to modify this. So I just bent up a piece of DOM and welded a little plate on it to mount the tension rod brackets to. I did a new radiator support structure, which will not be supporting any radiator. It just bolts on both sides. I capped off the whatever kind of structure you want to call this, but I capped that off. Some of the holes didn't line up quite right, so I've got to just ream those out and make it a little better. The reason the turbos aren't on right now is because the header and this whole structure is too long. So when I put the turbos on, it was kind of running into space issues with this. I'll have to shorten these up a little bit. I'm going to wait to do that until my wastegates come in, when I'll modify these for the external wastegates as well. So the power steering pump was sitting down here originally, and the cap was actually butting up against the headers. That also left the alternator mounting position right here, which is directly in the way of where the turbo exhaust pipe needs to go. Hence the reason for the Mazda 3 power steering pump. People use Toyota MR2 Spider pumps or Vauxhall pumps, along with a few other OEM electro-hydraulic power steering pump configurations. A lot of those are in short supply and hard to find, but it seems like the Mazda 3 pumps are still fairly plentiful. And now the thing that's probably taken up most of the time over the last month or so, the roll cage. So this has been an absolute labor of love. It's had me scratching my head, pulling my hair out, asking lots of questions, and most importantly, I've just learned an absolute ton. So it's not perfect, but it's not the worst either. I'm pretty impressed with how it turned out for my first time ever attempting to fabricate something like this. As you can see, I put secondary A-pillars in. That's a design that's becoming more common in Formula Drift. It's actually a requirement in FIA spec cages. I'll give you a peek at my rear X-brace with the cage here. I think it turned out pretty well. The things that have to be done still on the cage are forward anti-intrusion bars that go to the firewall, and then also the harness bars. As you can also see, I ended up cutting off the rest of the car right up until the windowsill. On my last hatchback, I backed it into a wall, and the pressure from the impact on this rear sort of fender structure actually ended up pushing my B-pillar up. So I figured if I cut that off and just have fiberglass from there back along with the bumper structure, then I shouldn't run into those types of issues anymore. Just as a side note here, my buddy Colby is doing absolutely insane things on this truck. I'm just gonna show you really briefly. Entirely custom 4-link suspension. Absolutely crazy. Here's his 1UZ. It's really, really neat. And over to the front, he's put an S13 front on his truck. But yeah, hopefully you guys want to continue following around, or following the build, and thank you for being a part of the Dreams team.